was 80 years old. And that was the
My sister went over there last week.
Fine, but thank you everybody for coming. My name is Philippe Johnson. I don't know a lot of you. I'm Linda Johnson's oldest son, so Linda's one of Ken's sisters. And I'll just be the MC for today, even though it's a fairly informal program.
I just wanted to say that we wanted to open our hearts and open our home to relatives on all sides. So we've got some Joneses here, we've got some Paulsons here, and we also wanted to open our home to old friends of Ken's. That we've actually got a couple of fellows that went to university at the same time Ken did, and I just am so happy to have them here, and also the neighbors who have been such a support to the whole family, of course, all along. Sometimes it's just the children of the neighbors, because some of our neighbors that we loved and enjoyed over the years are no longer with us, which is a bit of a shame. But and others have moved. You know, as when John and May Sorensen realized that Fred and I were moving back to the farm, they quickly gathered up their things and moved to Ponoka. Anyway, things like that. Over the years, we've had wonderful times with wonderful people, and I just want to say welcome to you all. Thank you for coming.
Isn't that something, right?
I didn't know Ken very well, but I did spend a year rooming with him along with 3 other fellows in university, and got to know Ken somewhat. One thing I remember about him is that he was an avid imitator of Red Skelton. If you ever remember Red Skelton, he was a comedian in that time. And Ken was always joking about him and having fun with us fellows. I've chosen to read. Oh, thank you. Okay. Psalm 23. God is seen as a caring shepherd and a dependable guide. We must follow God and obey his commands. He is our only hope for eternal life and security. I'm reading Psalm 23 now. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I was just very glad to known Ken, and as long as it was just, I think, one brief year that we spent together, but I'll never forget him.
I've been thinking about the fact that Big Brother was the sibling that seemed to have time for me. It seemed like all my big sisters were busy doing teenager things, and then I'm here looking at the circle, that driveway circle, that it was Ken who took the time to get me to learn how to balance on a 2-wheel bike, and who got me going on the driveway circle, and he basically taught me how to ride a bike. Don't remember any of my big sisters ever stepping in to keep me from falling over. I remember that was Ken that did that. And the other memory I have as a little girl is, I think it was Ken that took the time to teach me how to jump rope. Again, I think that girls were just all too busy being teenage girls, and Ken seemed to have the time to do that. And then as a, well, I had finished a year of university, I'd finished a year of NAIT, and I thought I was going to take a year off, and I needed to change locations, and I had no place to stay, and I checked. I said, have you got room for me to stay with you guys just for a little bit while I hunt down an apartment? And he was very amenable. I have no idea if Remy was happy about the idea or not, but I took over one of their spare bedrooms. And I managed to find an apartment that was close enough to the job that it was doable and reasonable. And so within, basically I spent one night, went hunting for an apartment, found it, went back and said, it's okay, I don't need to impose on you anymore, I'll be moving out. And he actually looked kind of sad and was kind of disappointed that I found a place that fast. I think he was kind of looking forward to having one of his sisters staying in the apartment. So Ken was just generally ready to share all the time.
Do you think it's something about this place, about this area that made him like that, or do you think it was something else?
I think rural living does perhaps teach you how to share in a lot of ways. I think you have to imagine it was a one-room schoolhouse that he was in from grade 1 to grade 9, and the work gets shared there definitely. And he had the model of our parents, who were strong co-op members, strong farmers union members. I think possibly rural life was, and family history was pretty important for Ken too. Definitely. Like when he went off to teach in the little country school in Alder Flats, and he realized that the boys particularly didn't have much to do, which was what his motivation was, to go off and get the credentials he needed to be a cadet leader. Again, sharing his time because he could see a need.
So, for those who are watching this, what's something that they ought to know about Ken that they might not?
Good question. Good question. His interest in world politics, like hearing other people, like his dog walk neighbor talking about how they were solving the problems of the world. That would be a conversation I never had with him. So I think he definitely, he adapted himself to the situation very well, but he did keep himself open to meeting new people and looking at new ideas in ways that I hadn't realized before hearing some of these other stories about Ken.
Anything else you want to share?
I think that's about it. It is the stories about loving his dog. Charlie and I had acquired a dog, and we're busy building the house just down the road. And he came and quietly said to me, "Do you think we should get a dog?" So us having the dog had definitely encouraged him to start lobbying Remy with the idea that they needed a dog. So I found that kind of funny. Yes, get a dog. I don't care. Get a dog. And they did.
Okay, so I'll read this message from my mother of her memories of Ken. Our memories of life are a continuous movie. Good parts we cherish and bad parts we prefer to forget. Some memories are not even real, but are ways of making sense of our life. Picking out the good stuff usually means memories of people we shared the good times with. And so today, that means my big brother Kenny. He was always Kenny, 6 years older than I was. Kenny was already a teenager by the time my memories started to stick. Those memories then came in the form of freeze-frame movie bits. That meant I remember him leading the way as we biked to Anthony Hill, his friends, the big boys, Stanley Crooks, Charles, Donnie Osterland, Gary Harris, him helping Dad seeding, harvesting. Then there was the day his leg was broken as he pushed me out from under cement bags stored in the chicken house, and the day his appendix burst on the operating table and he came near to losing him. The next freeze-frame photos were his graduation, so glamorous in his suit with carnation in his buttonhole. Then university, still glamorous and living in the big city. His stint in the Army Cadet Corps, singing in the university choir. One particular memory, real or otherwise, is the joy on Mom's face as she watched him sing. Then his first Beetle, that's the car for those who don't know. His first job teaching in Alder Flats and learning firsthand what poverty meant. His first passion, photography, that led to a job in the Wetaskiwin Times and work for the FUA and in Dad's campaigns in the 60s. And he became engaged to our good friend Donna. He and Donna didn't marry, but the beautiful ring he gave her made quite an impression on all of us. Now we're into the early 60s. It was my turn to take on the city and university life, but my big brother was there. The snapshots are fewer and farther between, but by now he was Ken, and there was Remy in his life. The excitement of his trip to China as photographer for the FUA delegation in 1964 was extraordinary. Ken came back with so much, a new outlook on life and wonderful art pieces to be shared. I still have my Silkworks picture of Sun Yat-sen, and which we enjoyed on his wall for the next 40 years. He also came back with a fascination for the Far East, and somewhere in all of this, Remy, the glamorous, elegant girl he was to marry. I missed their wedding in Kashmir, but John and I were both there at the farm when Ken and Remy arrived to tell us that their baby, little Leilani, had died. The despair was the deepest emotion I'd ever experienced. That is one freeze frame I would like to erase, but which will always be with me. Life goes on, and my contacts with Ken and Remy were fleeting family visits at the farm as Dad was destroyed by his stroke and Mum took over, holding us all together. By now, Ken had persuaded Remy to take on a pet, so the family now included Angel. Perhaps a few of us may have been amused at the love Ken and Remy lavished on that little dog, but the result was the most intelligent creature who returned life to their owners. She was very special. Ken wrote one of his many letters to the editor of the Edmonton Journal. His letters were regularly printed as he had style about Angel's death. I suspect the letter helped more than one bereaved person. Then, to our surprise, Ken and Remy adopted Dinah and Jessie. I put this as more important than the other things happening in their lives, things like Ken's war with his employers and subsequent early retirement, their utter delight in discovering cruises, and Remy's successes as science head at her school in Edmonton. All these things were mere background to their lives with the twins. The care, love, and joy lavished on these two pups was epic. Yes, we may have thought it a bit much. We didn't treat dogs like that at the farm. But there was no denying that Dinah and Jessie gave Ken and Remy all the love they needed for as long as they could. More memory freeze frames. Ken went back to university and worked on his thesis for a Master of English degree. The books and ideas were his delight. Their elegant downtown apartment was replaced by an even more elegant home in the university area. Every visit home included a day at Edmonton with Ken, Remy, and the dogs. Then Ken and Remy made 2 trips to France to visit John and I. The first trip was in 1998 when we lived in Lyon. My greatest recollection of this was their delight at having seen the beautiful water lily gardens of Giverny on their way to us, and that Ken wanted to experience the simple pleasures of rural France. We did this by finding a country cafe in the Beaujolais Hills that served us an omelette and salad lunch. Ken was content. The second visit in 2004 involved more travel. By now, Remy was retired, and we took our time visiting special sites in Provence and along the Mediterranean coast. The painted hills where Romans found pigments for paintings, the calanque of the Mediterranean coastlines, and the bullfight rings, little hidden villages in the hills behind Nice. It was a leisurely time full of fun explorations, and the first time I really spent time with these two special people. The actual visit is a bit of a blur, but the sense of the pleasure of two people exploring a new place stands out. Then that was it. We met again at Mum's funeral in 2012, kept in contact at Christmas, and then the call to help them move into a care home. It was a shock that indeed time takes us all, and that this solid couple who were a part of our lives were now moving into the shadows. The next years, as first Remy and now Ken left us, leaves no memories I want. So for me, the memories forged from a lifetime of freeze frames will be what I see when I remember Ken. And by the way, Ken's middle name is James. That's the name of Mum's grandfather, James Otten. The traditional practice of keeping names in the family was well set into the Ottens. Ken was part of that tradition. Love to you all, and thank you for remembering Ken and Kenneth James Nelson.
My mother and Ken's mother were sisters. Aunt Mildred was Ken's mother, of course, and Laura was my mother's name. I recall when I think I was 15 and Ken was 12 or so, there was about 22 of us that went on a fishing trip with aunts and uncles and neighbors around. And we had, it was in, well, when I was 15, it was about 1950 or 51. So the the vehicles that we had were of the time. I remember my uncle Earl had a 1-ton Dodge truck with about a 9-foot box on it. And that was his big grain truck. But anyway, we all went fishing to the Ram River, or to the Prairie Creek actually. We went to the site of the old Ram River oil, where they drilled for oil in the 1940s. They found no oil. My dad and Ken's dad and our uncles had all bought shares in Ram River Oil, and that's how they financed the ability to drill those wells, and found nothing. But they left the cabins and the derricks there, the old wooden derricks. And when we went to our fishing trip to the Prairie Creek, 22 of us bunked in those cabins that were built there for, of course, for the oil well drillers when they were there. And I can remember Ken, he was about 12, I think, laying beside me. And of course, with 22 of us out there on Prairie Creek, we caught a lot of fish. And we didn't have ice to put them in, and we got moss out of the bush and put them in boxes and stored them in the moss and brought them home. How they were when we got home, I don't remember. But anyway, there's another story that I remember when the Nelsons and the Joneses went to Pigeon Lake for that Sunday afternoon, and kids were of course in the water and playing around, and my dad, he wasn't one to go in the water, and so he was there sitting in a chair with his shoes and socks and everything. And Ken was out in about knee-deep water, and all at once he started falling down into the water, and he kept getting up and falling down, getting up and falling down. And I remember my dad got up out of his chair and ran out in the water with his shoes and socks and pants and everything to grab Ken, because he would have drowned, I'm sure, because he kept falling and getting his lungs full of water. So that was an episode that stuck with me, as did the fishing trip. And it was good times remembered, but then there were some times, like with the Pigeon Lake story, that we were scared. And with that, I'd like to say condolences to all of Ken's sisters, and may the life journey continue for all of us. Thank you.
Let me ask you a question before we go.
Yes.
So it sounds like you came from a pretty big family. Oh, you can keep the mic for now. It sounds like you came from a pretty big family, lots of cousins, and like you talked about going on a trip with 22 of you, which that's as big a fishing trip as I've ever heard of. What made Ken special?
You can go get one off the tree.
Well, Ken,
As long as you
his intellect, I guess, and his worldly thinking, that not only did Ken have that, but also Nancy especially, Ken's sister. They had worldly thoughts, and that's the way they lived their life. And Ken's love of his dogs and his wife is examples of his dedication. And that's something that, we all respect things like that.
As we all know, Ken really loved his animals, his dogs, and he would often spend a lot of time walking them near the river valley, and often met a lot of people doing that. So I'm going to ask Pat to come up and read a little something that one of his dog walking companions wanted to share.
Yes, this is Robert Farrow. He says, "My condolences for the passing of your brother Ken. Ken and I spent many years walking together at the off-beach area overlooking the North Saskatchewan River in Belgravia. Besides walking our dogs, we spent many mornings trying to solve the world's problems. Also, Ken would enlighten me about the latest insights he had read on his computer, whether real or fictional. I missed his companionship after his last dog passed away. Ken was a good soul who loved his animals, and they loved him. My sympathies to you and your sisters, Sylvia and Bob Farrow." I'm not sure, but I kind of think he was at Ken's 80th birthday party.
Over the years, And to me, Ken was always kind of a mystical figure because he was quite a bit older than I am. And the other thing was that he was a boy in this whole family of girls. And like there was always girls here, but then they'd always talk about Ken too. And then lots of times I didn't even like, who is this Ken? You know? But over the years I did get to know him a bit. But on behalf of our family, I just want to our condolences. And one of my memories here is I learned to ride a bike on this hill here. And I still remember, I think it was the girls, because lots of times Ken had already moved away when my memories kind of started.
I was sort of going back and forth between environmental scientist or taking something on that seemed a little bit more abstract, which was international development. And Ken explained to me why international development was so important, and Canadians going overseas and helping other countries and assisting where possible. And it was because of sort of those talks had a big influence on my decision to ultimately pursue international development. And I spent quite a bit of time overseas, and I realized if I don't like my government, I'm not going to like what it does overseas. So I came home and got involved in politics. And I did get a science degree, but I think politics was more interesting, and I'd certainly have him to thank for that in large part. And I definitely wouldn't have decided to try to be a lawyer, which I'm almost a lawyer now. And that it was a big part of Ken sort of encouraging me to do things that seemed difficult and that was going to take a lot of thinking. And also sort of encouraged me to pursue writing and just to not be afraid of big ideas and to sort of go.
Penny. Ken is my uncle. And Remy is my aunt. I've got a couple of tributes here from my cousins. So I'm going to read. The first one is from. I believe this is from my cousin Elizabeth and her husband Brian, who live in, where do they live?
Dayton.
In Dayton, Ohio. Okay, so my first meeting of Uncle Ken was at his wedding to my Tita Remy. That Tita is Aunt Remy. They traveled to Ellensburg, Washington for their wedding. My father, Charles Blake, was appointed to give Remy away by walking her down the aisle and presenting her before God, Ken, Reverend George Poor, and her family and friends. Her eldest sister, Nilda, had been preparing food for the reception for weeks. My youngest brother, Robert, would stand in as the ring bearer, but that wasn't to be when he became ill with the chicken pox. My Uncle Ken was so patient with me as we practiced my newfound role as ring bearer. It wasn't until last summer of 2022 that I viewed their wedding album in Remy's room. We had so much fun that day, recalling my aunt and uncle's special ceremony. I saw a photograph of myself as a member of their wedding party. I believed that Ken would make Remy very happy as they united in marriage. We traveled as a family to Edmonton to visit with Ken and Remy. One remembrance that stuck out to me was the love my uncle had for his family. He took us to the Nelson farm and introduced us to his parents and his many siblings. What pride and devotion he showed to each of them. It was easy to feel a part of them because of the way they welcomed us. They were living in the high-rise, which I thought was super cool as a young girl. Uncle Ken took me for rides in his sports car. It had only 2 seats, but he showed me a special place in the back where I could fit. It seems that we were always meeting for celebratory events, family reunions, weddings, camping trips, and cruises. One thing I witnessed firsthand was his exuberance and glee on the dance floor. I mean, he was wild. He's got that in all caps, as he expressed every emotion in his step work. I tried to keep up with him, but he was so unique in his own way. Lots of smiles all around as people enjoyed the way he moved. Uncle Ken loved his dogs, Angel, Dinah, and Jessie. It was really difficult for both my uncle and aunt to lose their dogs. After Angel died, I sent them a journal so they could write what Angel had meant to them. Uncle Ken shared his journal with us as we cruised to the Panama Canal. We shared tears and laughter as he read those meaningful moments between him and his dog Angel. It was such a touching tribute to their special relationship. The last thing I shared with him last summer was a video I took at the dog park where he faithfully walked all his dogs several times a day. He had such a big smile on his face watching the dogs run off leash at the park. This place brought him significant happiness as every dog and owner was welcomed into the pack. Life is about inclusivity and relating. This is what my Uncle Ken taught me. Please find below my message for Ken's memorial service. Many of my memories are from my childhood since my family moved away from Washington State when I was 12 years old to Ohio. The last time I saw Ken and Remy in person was at our family reunion in Vancouver, in my early 30s as an adult. Later I would call them on the phone and participated in some video calls later in their life. Ken Nelson was a caring and loving uncle to my family. When we visited in person or on the phone, he was always inquisitive about what was going on in our lives. He was a loving husband to his wife Remy, who, according to a story she shared with me, they met at the Edmonton airport where she needed assistance and he came to her rescue. It was the beginning of a long and loving relationship. Also a loving father to their daughter who passed away early in her life. Both Ken and Remy were proud dog owners and treated the dogs with love and care as though they were their children. I recall how Ken and my father Charles and other men in the family loved to discuss political issues of the day when they met. When I would call them to say hello, Ken loved to discuss current U.S. politics, especially if an election was occurring in the USA. They loved camping with their pop-up camper. One summer, we met them in Glacier National Park to camp, hike, and share stories with our family. Later in life, they became avid world travelers with my parents, my aunt Bing and Uncle Craig Lum, and Elizabeth and Brian Morris. Cruises to Alaska, Panama Canal, etc. were popular events in their life. Prior to their passing, Doreen Broska, Raylan, and Dick Joyce coordinated video calls with Remy and Ken after they moved to their nursing care facility. I participated in a couple of calls, and both Remy and Ken had difficulties communicating, but always a wonderful time to see them and share our love. I am grateful for Linda Johnson, who shared photos and video clips that my father had taken on vacations with Ken and Remy. Linda shared them with Ken after Remy's passing to help him remember past times. I am grateful and blessed for Ken's life that was shared with our family. He will be missed but always remembered. God bless their families as we remember Ken Nelson.
Was good friends with Grant Notley, who, when the legislature was in session, Grant would often walk across the high-level bridge to Ken's house, which obviously was well appointed and was probably a great place to hang out. And they'd talk politics all day. And Ken often would drive him around during election campaigns, and him and Grant would have great stories in the car, I'm sure. And Grant always refused to stay in a hotel room, so I imagine Ken had to sleep on a few couches with him as well. I'm not really sure about that, but it was probably the case. And sort of I was able to point to that relationship when I got hired by Rachel Notley over a decade ago for the first time, so that probably helped. So it's helped me in many ways.
And I was hoping to talk about how he was probably the first person I interacted with that I really understood and appreciated that he was someone who enjoyed ideas and intellectual pursuits, and that was different for me, especially as a child, and just I'm not sure I appreciated it until I really reflected on it with his passing, that he was the first person who delighted in talking about ideas and delighted in intellectual pursuits more so than just like practical applications of knowledge. He was someone who really liked to talk about ideas and think about things, and yeah, I think that really helped me be comfortable with being someone who was very curious and liked pursuing knowledge, and yeah, I really appreciate that and how that impacted me.
So obviously this played a role in your current career, yes?
Yeah, to a certain degree. I mean, in my current career, just being comfortable, going to school. I think less about my career choice and more just, like I said, when I was younger, being comfortable, being an intelligent person who thinks about things and tries to get smarter and who delights in, and it has helped me. It helped me in school to not always just take like a practical, like being okay just taking classes because they sound interesting and fun and are, you know, if they're hard, and that just means they're more fun. And it has that attitude has stuck with me through my career, and yeah, it's been.
So we'll close off with this. You are now a father and uncle. You know, you're part of the lives of other children. What Ken did for you, or is that something you try to do for the kids in your life?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it amazes me how curious kids are, and I can see how a lot of the time adults will try and to tell, you know, answer kids' questions in like the simplest way possible, and try and shield them from the complexity, which I understand, but to a certain degree, I find kids will just take what you say and they'll absorb whatever they can. You don't really need to simplify it for them. They'll you know, they'll take what they can get out of it, and the more you sort of expose them to the complexities, the more questions they have, and it doesn't, like, you don't have to limit it for them. And I hope, I mean, you never know what results you're going to get, but I hope that helps spark curiosity and interest, and you know, an appreciation that there's interesting, complex things, that there isn't always a simple answer, and that's okay, and you can keep asking questions.
You know, he was a beautiful individual, and so was Remy, who we remembered not too long ago. And so thank you, everybody, for coming today, and please take care.